Don't say a word, just turn around and let me see. Girl, you got something special for me. It's way too many suckers in the VIP. Barely got my car out front.
With these series of films, they're very old school. They're sort of kind of throwbacks to 70s and 80s horror films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre as mentioned, and it just sort of, even The Omen I could see little bits of from Seconds Apart. But my main sort of question is, was that the intention from the get-go? Make sort of old school type horror films that people could remember from seeing back in the day and enjoying, instead of having this whole emphasis on realism and...
Well, I think... Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, I love the old school films. I love movies like The Exorcist, The Omen, the original Halloween, the original Nightmare on Elm Street, The Shining. These are films I love. And, you know, that's when it used to be a craft, for lack of a better word, but it's a good word for it. And they used to really, you know, care about it and be inventive about how they made the films, but the stories were good, the characters were good, the fear was good, the scares were good, the tension was good. All the things that really make horror great. CG doesn't make horror great. You know, it can be helpful in certain instances in the right circumstances, but, you know, not a movie does it make. So we try to stick to that, but I mean, you know, where the classics maybe have been a little dated or a little slow for today's contemporary audience, we looked for fresh concepts and sort of a narrative that might move a little faster than, say, the classics did, but to implore, and, you know, the methods used when they made the, you know, original horror movies. Yeah, those types, the classic ones. So it's cognizant, and I think it comes from my taste, and then sort of bringing it down to the filmmakers, and you know, probably going to filmmakers that see that, because you get different types that come in, and different writers that come in to present their projects in the first place, and some of them want to do movies like that because they love those movies. I mean, pretty much anybody that likes the genre does. And so they sort of walk in gearing in that direction. Sometimes we actually have to gear them a little out of it because they're just too far in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when, as producer for pretty much all the films, what's the sort of main things that you really have to look for that go into the film? So what are the main sort of...
I mean, obviously a good script. Yes. That's number one. A good filmmaker with a vision. You know, that's number two. Cast, obviously. Yeah. But, you know, it's concept. I mean... And when you look at the script and you look at the concept, like Seconds Apart is a different concept. Yes, it's, you know, we've seen twins movies before, but this is sort of a warped twins movie. Yet it's very, you know, it's really about certain characters intertwining with themselves and problems that they have that are very real, and it's got these two creepy twins in it. It was unique. I mean, you just haven't seen many scripts like that come across my desk. So I look for something that's different and unique that may not necessarily be mainstream, you know, but is interesting and makes for a film that we haven't seen before. And I don't think we've seen Seconds Apart before. You know, like you said about Husk, we've seen, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we've seen that kind of movie. What I liked about Husk as well was it was its own story, it had its own mythos and mythology to it, but it went to the classical conventions of these type of movies. And, you know, Seconds Apart sort of went to the sort of Carrie conventions a little bit, combined a few of those classic films as well. So I look for a concept, you know, that works in something different, because, you know, then they're truly After Dark originals.
The films themselves being original, like not even just concept aside, the movies themselves feel original. Did it make them harder to make, even with the After Dark Originals title there?
No, I mean, they're harder to make by trying to keep the quality for the budgets we're doing them at. I mean, you brought up at the beginning the studio films and throwing money at CGI and trying to make a movie look real that way, but they're throwing a lot more money at these movies. We do them for less money because we're an independent company, but we want them to look as good as those movies in their own right, even though they're not filled with CGI, for example. So, no, I don't think so.
Okay. With horror films these days, again, just coming back to it, just the whole trend going on, there's usually a thing where it's either based on complete suspense, like Paranormal Activity and sort of those types of films, or you've got, and I hate the term, but torture porn, where you've got, yeah, I don't like it either, but you've got Hostel, you've got Saw, and they churn out sequel after sequel, and they're still making money. But with the After Dark Originals, what I noticed is you've kind of got that nice little mix. You really build that suspense, and then you go into the gore, and even then the gore's not ridiculously excessive. It's just very tension sort of building. And I've noticed that through visuals as well. Again, as producer, how did you sort of keep that balance even throughout the script, rewrites and production and so forth?
Well, I mean, we're always trying to do 8 different types of movies, first of all. So, you know, we try to stay away from, quite frankly, the torture porn and that sort of stuff. It's not my taste.
Yeah.
So, if I'm going to be the one choosing the project in the first place, it's probably not the one I'm going to choose, not to say they don't cross my desk. As far as the violence is concerned, I don't mind if it's super violent. I don't mind if it's lightly violent. Whatever serves the story best is always how we make our determinations, and each filmmaker has a different vision.
Yeah.
So, you know, some of them want to go crazy with it, some of them want to go lighter with it. It's not, what I'm trying to say to you, it's not a cognizant thing. It's a project-specific thing, and it comes through the creative meetings and looking at the overall vision of the whole movie and seeing what's appropriate for that movie. I mean, I think some of the things that you're mentioning, you know, Hostel, Saw, I mean, you know, and they're great franchises and they've made lots of money, so nothing negative to say about them. And the original Saw I loved. I wasn't as big a fan of the Hostel franchise, but, you know, the original Saw I really liked.
Yeah.
I kind of got tired after like 4 or 5, but, you know.
I think there's a 14th one coming out next week. So
exactly, 14th and 14D or something like that. But, you know, they're specifically going after a formula that they've created, and they're making sequel after sequel. And you brought up earlier, you know, we're not doing remakes. You know, we're not doing sequels. We're trying to do original and different horror movies, and again, serve what the script and the story of those movies is with all of our resources that we have available to us, the best possible way we can.
Yeah.
That's always what dictates our decisions and trying to make the movie as good as it can be.
Okay.
No formula, in other words, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's sort of what I loved about it.
The only formula is that they're all original films. That's the formula. I mean,
and it's refreshing, I got to say. In terms of casting, I sort of wanted to look at as well, including Seconds Apart. You had Orlando Jones in there. I'm a big fan of. I think he's a great actor. But I'm just, how did you get those sort of actors onto this sort of project? And did it was it a simple process of casting and just sort of auditions and?
Well, Orlando actually we had a good relationship with, and he was a friend, and we sent him the script, and he loved the script, and we just thought he would be great for the part. So that was actually super easy. It doesn't always work out that way, but in this particular case, just had a good feeling that he would like this part, and he did, and he showed up tenfold, so it was great. I mean, he's a really talented guy.
He is,
you know, when we go after some of the bigger actors, because it's the horror genre, because they're smaller movies, sometimes it's harder to get them. Sometimes you have to convince them a bit more. Sometimes they say no.
Yeah.
So again, it's so funny because everything comes down to the project, the elements on that specific project. But what we are finding is a lot of younger actors are coming to us now because the brand's gotten popular, you know, and they want to work with us.
Yeah.
You know, so we hear from our casting agents, so-and-so wants to work with you, so-and-so wants to have lunch with you, and they're up-and-coming young actors, or even some of the more established actors that are horror fans. They're like, hey, I want to go do a movie with After Dark, even if it's just a cameo. You know, so the casting process, you know, can be fun on these movies. What I like about horror movies is they don't have to be star-driven. You know, it's awful. It's great to have a huge star in your movie if you can, but they don't have to be star-driven. They never were. You know, when you go find a new franchise, a new horror movie like that creates itself or whatever, I mean, was Jason the star? I mean, you know, he would wear a hockey mask. But everybody knew Jason because you created a character there. So you don't need the same stars. And look at who the supporting cast was. I mean, you didn't know. Now, sure, you've got Nightmare on Elm Street, the original, where you had Johnny Depp in there, and you see these people show up, but that's just coincidence. At that point, he wasn't Johnny Depp.
Well, I've always thought that having a big name star in a horror film could even be distracting at some point.
It can take you out of the movie.
Yeah, I think it can. Well, that's just sort of my opinion. I wanted to sort of come back to you for a second, putting After Dark aside. You start off as so you've directed films, you've done Dungeons and Dragons, and you've done An American Haunting, which is very old school, I have to say. So what was the process of going from directing to producing films instead of just sticking with the directing game?
I mean, I do a lot of work really close with the directors in producing all these films anyway, so I'm still pretty sharp as a director because I'm right there with them all the way through. And I'm a very creative producer because of my background and what I do. But that being said, it was because after I did American Haunting, it did well. There were a lot of directing offers, but Lionsgate came to me with like an interesting offer, which was that I could set up my own sort of horror mini studio, which is After Dark Films, and sort of learn everything about it and become sort of like a major horror label within, you know, that wasn't actually part of Lionsgate, but the idea would be like a branch of Lionsgate unofficially. And I didn't know much about the studio system, the marketing, and that's always, you know, an important part of any filmmaker's film. Once they make and put all this time into, you know, making their baby, which is the film, then they have to hand it off to these studios, and they really don't have a lot of idea what happens to it. And sometimes it gets barbarized, and a film can do badly for the wrong reasons, which is it was just presented to the public as something else than it really was, or incorrectly. Because when a movie's being marketed, you only know the marketing materials to decide whether you want to go see the movie.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be interesting to do that and to be able to, you know, have a chance to let other filmmakers get their movies out theatrically and, you know, make movies and do it in an environment that wasn't a studio environment, and to come to a company if you had a good project that would actually say, okay, we're going to make your movie, and then make it within 3 months later instead of putting it in development hell for 7 years or however long it is. So I thought it would just be interesting to learn everything about the genre, meet everybody in the genre, and see what's out there, and then, you know, spend a couple of years on that because I'm young, and then go back to directing. So that's pretty much what I'm doing.
With After Dark Originals, was there even putting a, like, you produced a film called Captivity, and
well, we didn't produce it, we just released it.
Oh, okay, well I can just, apologies, but I can imagine that would have had some hell with the MPA there. With After Dark...
It actually had major hell with the MPA because we put up billboards that got banned all across the United States, and ended up making us move the release date by 6 months and ruined the opening of the movie. It was one of the biggest fights that any producers ever had with the MPAA. It was all over the press.
Yeah, I was reading
we
up about that.
took them on.
That's a pretty notable thing to take on the MPAA, is have your guard ready.
Yeah.
But, just with After Dark
really
Originals...
have your lawyers ready.
Yeah, close enough these days with their pens and papers. Comparing that experience, because I did read up about after seeing the movie, because I really liked it and I was just curious.
I did shoot the torture scenes in that movie.
Sorry?
Yeah. As an enhancement before we put it out, I did 4 extra days of shooting and did shoot the horror scene, the torture scenes in the movie.
That's a pretty notable story. Don't tell the MPAA, but it's still a pretty good story. But just comparing that to After Dark Originals, those problems, you know, were they as ridiculous as Captivity, or?
After Dark Originals didn't have any problems like that. I mean, you know, it's a clean brand. We cooperate with the MPAA. You know, we don't want those kind of problems with it. We want to, you know, make our theatrical event, make it enjoyable for the fans, make a great horror weekend, and then get our movies out digitally on DVD any way we can that the fans can access them, you know, easily and simply. Give them as many extras as we can. I mean, we really want to try to satisfy the horror audience and give them something different. I mean, we run into problems like anybody else does, production problems, you know, having to get rid of a director on day 1 while the movie's shooting. Oh, wow. You know, and then dealing with it and being in the middle of Bulgaria while it happens. I mean, so we run into those kind of problems, practical production problems, but, you know, nothing on the marketing side or taking on, you know, government organizations or anything like that.
Thank God for that.
Hopefully those days are completely behind us, because I like my focus being here. It's much better use of my time.
There's always that whole thing where if you're making a horror film, there's always going to be an uphill battle, and the MPA is up there waiting for you. But otherwise,
yeah, I mean, depends on the film, but I mean, you know, they're never giving us the ratings we want, and sometimes that's just the nature of the beast. I mean, unless you're one of the major studios that pays into the MPA fund, that's just the way it works. It's kind of like a mafia.
Yeah, well, that's a nice way of putting it, I gotta say. The success of After Dark Originals, it would have contributed with DVD sales a fair bit.
DVD sales, but really digital and VOD and pay-per-view are very, in the States, are very strong now because they're starting to replace DVD sales over there. It's easier access. I mean, people can pull it off. They go to After Dark. There's a new release every single month. You can get library titles, and you can put it on your iPad or on your computer, wherever you want, and watch it whenever you want.
With these horror films, a lot of horror filmmakers, or even just filmmakers in general, have always said they've wanted their films to be seen on the big screen in a large room with a bunch of strangers so they can all experience this horrible 100%. Thing. So with VOD being so successful, is that sort of a disappointment, considering that they could be in cinemas and having that big release?
Well, some of them will be. I mean, some of them will break out for that, but when you make so many, they're not all justifying that kind of, frankly, P&A spend.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot of money to put a movie out in the United States in a wide theatrical release. We do put every movie out in our festival, so every movie gets its theatrical release, and it gets released across the country.
Of course, yeah.
East, center, west, south. So, you know, I mean, it's not 2,000, 3,000 screens, but, I mean, the concept that you're talking about, every filmmaker wants to be in a room with that audience watching their film on the big screen. Every movie that gets made in After Dark Originals, that happens.
Okay, that's great.
You know, and it has the opportunity, if they do a great job, and we can get a partner, say financially, like Lionsgate or whatever studio, to go with us, that they then have the opportunity to go on the 1,500 or the 2,000 screens.
Okay, that's fantastic. Yeah, because after seeing these films on DVD, I'm like, I wish I saw this in a cinema. But even
Right.
then, they're still great. There's still an experience there.
Well, when
so
the festival comes next time, come over to America, you can watch them all in the cinema.
I've already got my ticket and don't even know it yet. But in terms of, even though you have said you working with the producers is it's sort of like being a director in a sense, and it sort of keeps you on your feet and very sharp. Have you looked into being a director on any other films in the near future that aren't horror films, or are you really just keeping your head in the horror films?
No, we've done 5 action movies, you know, under something called After Dark Action, and we just, like, they're all in the can now, and they'll all be released in a similar format April of next year, and we did those in conjunction with Joel Silver, so, you know, premier, you know, the most prolific action producer out there. We did a larger film called Bullet to the Head with Walter Hill directed and Sylvester Stallone starred in, and that comes out all around the world April 12th. So, you know, there are other films. Me personally, the next action movie we're doing, I'll probably co-direct it with one of the DPs we've been working with, because it's a really fun concept, and we basically get to play 25 days with a, you know, car messing up a European city, and it's like a Shelby super snake causing a lot of havoc in the downtown core of a European city, and that's just fun to shoot. So we'll
Sounds fun
probably do
listening
that.
to it, yeah.
And I've been very active with the director on Rekill, the one that's going to come out theatrically next year, which is our really cool zombie movie. So that's sort of stuff to dabble with, you know, beyond everything else we're about to do, and then after that, you know, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I won't take up too much more of your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey, real pleasure meeting you.
And myself and Planet Open want to thank you for bringing back original horror films. We've missed them, and they are fantastic.
Well, thank you for your support. I'm glad you like them.
No, thank you very much.
8 more coming.
Oh, let's hope so.
No, they're happening.